On this first problem here, what's the first thing we have to do to factor this? Come on, everybody did it. What do we have to do? Yeah, we're going to multiply the first coefficient times the third coefficient to get m. 4 times 12 is 48. So we're looking for numbers that multiply to get 48. And the second coefficient, that's going to be what? 19, and that's going to give us a, right? So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to 48 and add to get to 19. If you're having trouble with it, start listing out numbers. Just start at 1. At least that's what I would do. So we would have 1 times 48. That doesn't work because 1 plus 48 is 49. Then we would have 2 and 24. Also doesn't work because 2 plus 24 is 26. Then we'd have 3 and, what is 48 divided by 3? 16. Does that work? Yeah. So we get 3 and 16. So if you don't know it, if you're having trouble coming up with it, just start making a list until you get to one that works. That's going to help us fill in the areas. So what is the area of the top left rectangle going to be? Yeah, that's the first term. So that's going to be 4j squared. How about the top right rectangle? Okay, we can choose either one of these two. It can either be 3 or 16. I heard somebody say 16, so we'll go with that. Is it just 16 by itself?
16J.
Yeah, it's got to be 16J because remember, this rectangle and this rectangle together are going to add up to 19J. So this is going to be 16J. And then if we use the 16 here, then what's going to go here?
3J.
The 3J. Okay, the 16 and the 3, those came from right here, the two numbers that work for M and A. And then in the bottom right rectangle, what are we going to have? 12. All right, so we've got our areas in there. Now we have to figure out what the height and the width of those rectangles will be to get those areas. So the easiest way to do that is to take one row of rectangles and to find the GCF. So if we take this row right here and we find the GCF, what's the biggest number that goes into 4j squared and 16j? 4j. Now if you had the 3j here, which I know some of you did, you had 4j squared here and 3j here. What was your GCF? That would be 1j, right? And it actually turns out that we're going to get that right up here when we're done here. Okay, so since the GCF here is 4j, I know that that is going to be the height of these rectangles, and I'm going to take the height times the width to get each of those areas. So I'm going to take 4j times something in each of those to get the area. What do I multiply by 4j squared? I'm sorry, what do I multiply by 4j to get 4j squared? Yeah, it's just going to be j, or I'm going to put 1j in there. So it's going to be j. And what do I multiply by 4j to get 16j? 4. So these two numbers that I just wrote down, the ones that are in blue, those are going to be the widths of the rectangle. So this is going to be 1j. This is going to be 4. And since I know that this rectangle here has a width of 1j, it's the same thing down here. So this rectangle is going to be something times 1j. And what do I multiply by 1j to get 3j? 3. Now, I'm approaching this from a little bit of a different way than we usually do. But if the height of this is going to be 3, then how do I check to make sure I got the answer right this way? I've got a height of 3 here. I've got a width of what right here? 4. And what should I get when I multiply those together? Should get 12, right? So I take the height 3 times the width 4. And if I did it right, I'm going to get the area here that I had written in. All right, so I'm almost done here, but I'm not quite done. I still need to write my answer. I'm going to write this as 2 factors. Each factor is going to be in parentheses. What's going to be the first factor? Yeah, it's going to be 4j plus 3. It's going to be the height of these rectangles. So it's going to be 4j plus 3. And the second factor? Right here, j plus 4. So number 2, we should be able to go through pretty quickly because we know what we're doing here. What's m going to be? 24. What's A going to be? What two numbers multiply to 24 and add to 10? 4 and 6. All right, so we're going to use that to fill in our areas. The first rectangle here, top left, is going to be 8k squared. Then I'm going to put the 4 here, and it's 4k, right? You'll get the same answer if you put 6k there. It's just going to be a different order. Then we'll put the 6k here, and what goes in the last one? 3. And so we need to find the GCF of this row of rectangles here. What's the biggest number that goes into 8k squared and 4k? Ooh, no. It's going to be 4k, right? Because 2k does go into both of them, but 4k also does, and 4 is bigger. Remember, we want the biggest one. If we put a 2k there, we would end up with a problem when we get down here to the bottom. Actually, right here, we would have to multiply 4k times something to get 6k, and you'd have to use a fraction or a decimal to do that, so that's not going to work. All right, so I know the height is 4k, so I can take 4k times something in each one of those two rectangles. What do I multiply by 4k to get 8k squared? 2k, so that's how wide this rectangle is going to be. And what do I multiply by 4k to get 4k? So that's how wide that rectangle is going to be. And we go down to the bottom. This is going to be something times 2k, and this is going to be something times 1. Hopefully we can put the same thing in both of those, can we? Can we put the same number here and here? What's going to work there? 3. So the height of this rectangle is 3. And so what's our answer going to look like? And again, if you had the 4k and the 6k flipped, then it would be 2k plus 1 here and 4k plus 3 here, and that's the same answer. All right, so on number 3, it's a little bit different because we have some negatives in here. Up till this point, every number or every quadratic that we have factored has had all positives. But that's not realistic. Sometimes we're going to run into negatives. So in this problem, we have a negative 12 here for our third coefficient. So what that does, if we take our third coefficient of negative 12 times our first coefficient, instead of getting 24, we get negative 24, right? And that was given to us. We still know that our two numbers are going to add up to 5. That doesn't change anything here. All right? But what does change is this negative on the m. If I want two numbers to multiply together to get a negative, what's going to have to happen? I mean, I already gave you the answer here, but what has to happen to get a negative when we multiply? If I multiply two numbers together, we need one of them to be positive and one of them to be negative. So you'll notice here that the 8 is positive and the 3 is negative. So if we take an 8 times a negative 3, we get negative 24, right? Now it seems a little weird because 8 plus 3 is 11, it's not 5. So how does this work for A? Yeah, we're actually subtracting because the 3 is negative, right? So since the 3 is negative, it's really 8 minus 3 to get A. So these two add up to 5, but when we add them together, we're actually subtracting because one's negative. Does that make sense? All right, so this is already given to us, though. We don't have to worry about finding that because we gave it to you. So what we need to do is just fill in the rectangles like we normally do. What's the area of the top left rectangle going to be? Yeah, that's no different than ever before. It's going to be 2m squared. Down here, or I'm sorry, over here in the top right and the bottom left, we're going to put the 8 and the negative 3. Now, personally, and this is just a personal thing, I like to put the negative number here because I think that makes things easier for me. But you don't have to put the negative number here. You could put it here. In fact, if you look at the next example, they're both negative, so it doesn't really help us out if we put them one way or the other. But I'm going to go ahead and put the negative 3 here. And what am I missing with that negative 3? Okay, we need the m there. And then what's going to go here? 8m. And then what goes here? Negative 12. So now when we're finding the numbers that multiply to get those areas, when we're finding the height and the width, we're going to have to keep those negatives in mind. We have to make sure that we get the negatives where they're supposed to be negative. All right, so let's look at the first row. What is the GCF of 2m squared and negative 3m? What's the biggest number that goes into 2 that also goes into 3? 1, right? Well, so our GCF is going to be 1. But then we also have some m's there. Do they have any m's in common? How many? Yeah, they have 1 in common, so it's going to be 1m. So to get these areas, we're going to take 1m times something in each of those rectangles. What do I multiply by 1m to get 2m squared? 2m. So that's how wide this one's going to be. And what do I multiply by 1m to get negative 3m? Negative 3. So this is going to have a width of negative 3. So then going down to the bottom, I know this right here has a width of 2m. So it's going to be something times 2m. And I know this right here has a width of negative 3, so it's going to be something times negative 3. What do I multiply by 2m to get 8m, and what do I multiply by negative 3 to get negative 12? 4. Positive 4 or negative 4? Positive. So we're going to have a 4 right there. Now we just write our answer like we have been. What's our first factor going to be? Okay, 1m plus 4, or we could just write m plus 4. And our second factor? 2m minus 3. Now, if you had done this the other way, if you had put the negative 3m here, and you put the 8m here, you would get the same answer, except you would have the 2m minus 3 first, and you would have the m plus 4 second. So looking at the last one then, we have two numbers here, the first coefficient and the third coefficient, that multiply to get positive 24. But when we add them together, we're going to get a negative 11. This one's a little tricky. So we want two numbers to multiply together to get a positive, but when we add them together, we want to get a negative. So again, we already know what the answer is, but what's going to happen to multiply to get positive and add to get negative? What's that? Yeah, they both have to be negative. Because remember, a negative times a negative is a positive. But if we add two negatives together, we get another negative. Just a bigger negative. Because when we add two negatives, the signs are the same. We add them and keep the sign the same. Alright, so we can check this here. Negative 3 times negative 8 is positive 24. Because a negative times a negative is positive. And negative 3 plus negative 8 is negative 11. Because we added them together and kept the negative. Alright, so we can just check to make sure these numbers are correct. But again, we gave them to you, so you didn't need to worry about that. So now let's use those to fill in the areas. What's the area of the top left rectangle going to be? What is it? 2n squared. Okay, now on the last problem I said I like to put the negative one here, but they're both negative, so it really doesn't matter. Which one do you guys want to put top right? Negative 8? Okay, so we'll put the negative 8n here, which means that the negative 3n goes there, and then in the bottom right, 12. Alright, so what's the GCF of 2n squared and 8n? We can ignore the negative here when we're finding the GCF. So what's the GCF of 2n squared and negative 8n? 2n. Okay, good. So to get the area, we take the height times the width. We know the height, we don't know the width yet. What do we multiply by 2n to get 2n squared? Okay. And so that's how wide this rectangle is going to be, 1n. What do we multiply by 2n to get negative 8n? Negative 4. So that's how wide this rectangle is going to be. Then we go down here. what do we multiply by 1n to get negative 3n? What'd you say, Kira? Negative 3. Okay, does that work here also? If I put a negative 3 in here, what's negative 3 times negative 4? Positive 12, right? So that's going to be a negative 3 here. And so what's the answer going to look like?
2n minus 3. 1n minus 4.
Perfect. And it's okay if you put the 1 in front of the n here. If you say 1n minus 4, that's perfectly okay. And if you had the negative 3n here and the negative 8n here, then you would have the n minus 4 first here, and you would have the 2n minus 3 second.